What's going on, everybody? Trying to get body freedom from government. Looks like we're out here at the shooting range. How's everybody's Saturday going? Saturn day. Yeah. What do we got here? How's the stream? Is the stream working? Oh, that looked like a place to aim your gun. Uh-huh. Oh. Hey. Oh. Yeah, just wanted to go. Did I look at gematria? Must be a great feeling. Yeah, it's great. Is it breaking up or is it good? Where's that? Where do everyone? Okay, remember the little plate, the plate with the little globe on it? It's not a globe. It's someone looking at the flat earth from like through a telescope or something. Okay? So that makes you feel better. It's not a globe, all right? But anyway, those designs of the old plates, I brought them back. Let's see. How's that? Coming through yet? Is one good? I'm sorry, I don't know. Does it seem better? Is it good? Are we good? Better now. Okay. Very good. Very good. Yeah, what I was saying about the old design license plates are new again. I used to only have them in plastic, but now they're in aluminum. And so to celebrate the introduction of this new product, I am going to be giving away, like you said, you hear that? You know what that sounds? You know what these are? Of course, it would reconnect right when I show the cool stuff. This right here, you know what these are? Yep. Sounds like silver, don't it? You need to talk. Tried texting, never heard back. I'll get back to you. There's a couple that I haven't got back to, and I'm sorry. Sometimes people fall through the cracks, but just keep trying to get my attention. Seems to work for some. So I think that it can work for everyone. Persistence is a virtue. Just don't be mean, just try to get a hold of me, and I'll give it out again. I just did yet the other day. But don't call. But I will not be cool if it's just like you're calling to talk to me all day about something that is possible. It has to be like an emergency. Otherwise, a text message is good. Anyway, back to this shiny stuff. Every 10 orders this week on the website, I'm going to be including one of these in 1 out of 10 shipments. Okay. These are worth $50 each. So you could buy $5 worth of exercise your rights cards and potentially come out 10 times ahead, 10 times a winner. And I got a lot. I got a bunch. So if you guys want to order, the new plates are really nice. They come individually plastic wrapped, and they are very high quality print, nice thick aluminum. I'm thinking about soon selling or offering some kind of locking mechanism for the license plates, because I've heard cops like to jack. Anyway, is spiritual and emotional sovereignty. And what I wanted to do is just talk about that for a little bit. And what I'm going to be talking about today is in this book, Freedom from Government, How to Reclaim Your Power. This is also available at shop.freedomfromgovernment.org. That's where I'm getting the silver. Real money. Yeah, you can pay cash and you might get silver back. So I think it's a good deal. Okay, so spiritual and emotional sovereignty. I'm going to start off by reading a little bit of my book. Is it too? I'm sorry. Spiritual and emotional sovereignty. First off, spiritual sovereignty is the result of emotional sovereignty. In addressing the idea of emotional sovereignty, we will indicate how spiritual sovereignty can be attained. Some definitions of emotional sovereignty follow. First of all, it's liberation, freedom. A state of emotional sovereignty is obtained when a person recognizes both intellectually and emotionally that he or she is the total creator of his or her reality and has the sole responsibility for him or herself. These concepts might sound like simplistic metaphysics for many lecturers, and others espouse them. However, I'm going to take you deeper into the areas where you likely have not attained emotional sovereignty. Areas where there is a disguised play being acted on the stage. And the playbill says one thing, but the message the play carries says something totally different. I will point out the contradictions in the generally accepted philosophies on government and the true meaning of freedom in your country, in your own thinking, and in the systems that we have set up that have been set up to enslave us. And even though we claim we are free, you ever hear that? Free country. We're actually perpetuating exactly the opposite. So the concept of sovereignty has been discussed, debated, and questioned throughout history. From before the Roman Empire through the present day, there are many points that will be brought up that, taken separately, may look as connected. However, I'm going to link them and show you just how deep your sense of non-sovereignty is and how oppressive, ancient, and obsolete this system is. The system that we live in really is. So, sovereignty and the Constitution. We need to discuss things that the majority of people in the United States of America are currently very closely tied to, most notably issues of an educational, political, or religious nature. Many feel that these ideas are some of the cornerstones of our existence. As an example, many individuals speak very highly of the Constitution of the United States and how it guarantees freedom for all people. Yet some things have happened since 1776 that have gradually pulled the wool over our eyes so that we are being told one thing, but in reality, the opposite is being played out. Now, in no way would I be pointing a finger. In no way saying that you're bad or you're wrong. All the systems set up on our planet, dating back thousands of years, were taught to you by your forefathers, who had been grappling with these same issues themselves for a long time as well. Thus, this is in no way a judgment of you, but we are out of time. We must act quickly with firm and absolute resolve. This is a time when we can enslave ourselves more deeply, or where we can finally achieve our sovereignty. Within years, and I wrote this book years ago, so we're like here. We're going to decide the direction we wish to go. And yeah, I have a feeling once you take the vaccine, it's too late. Once you get the jab, it's too late. And I hate to say that, but that's just how I feel. That's for you. So how is it that we enslave ourselves, man? That's kind of crazy. Why would anybody want to do that to themselves? I do that every time, Mikkel. Why do you say that? Thanks. Now I'm going to have to figure something else out. Anyway, ways that we enslave ourselves. There are many things occurring within your reality right now that keep you enslaved. To use a very simple analogy, in our society, we have it set up so that marriage is a socially sanctioned institution and usually legally sanctioned as well. If you operate within the parameters of marriage, you are led to believe that you have certain privileges. Now, it is a fact not well known that when you enter into a contract such as marriage, indirectly there are related issues that will apply as a result of a legal marriage. When you sign anything that has to do with the state or local government, there are times when you actually relinquish certain rights. When you sign a marriage contract, you give up your right to educate your children the way you see fit, giving the state authority to educate them and even remove them from you if necessary. Thus, you give up your right to educate your own children, depending on the laws of each individual state, but they seem to all be getting worse, and there seems to be a really big problem with missing children that need to come home in this country and in the world. These things are not clearly understood when one enters this contract, but it's important to note that nobody is trying to get you. Because of your own deep-seated emotional beliefs, you have created covert ways to keep yourself stuck in these dysfunctional emotional beliefs. What is covert is what you're doing to yourselves. Do you follow? Another example, one written right into the Constitution, is the license. One other example, one written into our Constitution, is the right to drive. However, because it's commercial activity, the commerce is regulated. However, when you apply for a driver's license, you give up your rights, and you are thereby granted a privilege. But because you exist under the Constitution, you have a right to drive. I'd like to clarify that your constitutional right to drive is basically a right to liberty, or to travel, go where you want, and use the roads to do it. I call it using a machine to move my body. Nobody can regulate that, And the Supreme Court has ruled that this includes one's personal automobile. Because that is your right, you don't have to do anything to exercise it other than to exist. However, when you enter into a contract such as a driver's license, you relinquish that right and subject yourself to laws that are made regarding the privilege you are now given. As teenagers, you're taught that you take driver's ed, apply for a license, and then you can legally drive, right? Of course, when you get your license, you're then subject to all the laws about automobile insurance, vehicle registration, the laws of the road. Your traveling then becomes a privilege instead of a natural right, correct? You're never taught that you had a choice. I have that song in my head going, dun, 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 you know, Decepticons. Another example is common law marriage. Marriage in the eyes of God. Never mind the piece of paper. Retaining your rights to educate your children, or you can sign a contract and thus no longer educate your own children. You and your spouse become legally bound to each other and are given certain supposed rights. I mean, privileges, not rights. You are never told that you have a choice. It is just taken for granted that you get married and sign the papers, get your marriage license, right? There's seldom conscious thought about alternatives that may better serve your situation. When you go for your first driver's license, you are not told that you have a choice under the Constitution, which our forefathers wrote and which we all have a part in. You are not told you have a choice either to retain your natural rights as a citizen or to sign away these rights in exchange for certain privileges. And all the laws those privileges are subject to, if you retain, for instance, your common law rights, your natural rights, even if you are caught by a policeman for speeding, there may be a hassle, but constitutionally, you still have the right to liberty. You can be fined or punished only when you have given away your rights in exchange for privileges, but then you are bound by all their legislation. Not having a driver's license, according to the law, does not give you the right to violate safety laws. According to the Supreme Court, you are still subject to the speed laws and other rules of the road. The punishment for not having a driver's license differs from state to state. In Arizona, it's simply a fine. In other states, it can be jail. So there's a wide variety in the type of crime as well as punishment. A misdemeanor in Arizona could be a felony in another state. So if you're going to drive without a license plate or without a license, you must be prepared to explain, preferably without emotion, your reasoning and your philosophy. You must always also be prepared for an unexpected night in jail, possibly your car being towed, and you must know what to do in these cases and what your remedy is. So, the best philosophy that I like to promote is 100% responsibility. The point that I wish to make is that when you give up your power to another person or an institution to keep yourself in line, you have given up your sovereignty. Let us give you an example using a more responsible philosophy. Let's say that we want to drive cars on the roads. Yes, hey, sovereign, you say be prepared to lose. What do you define losing as? Because I define winning as standing up no matter what they do. That's winning. That's a win every time. Losing is not having confidence. Losing is having a negative self-talk, a negative mental attitude. That's the first thing. That's so important. The thing that I'm trying to get across is these guys are just men and we're just using words, Don't be scared. Exactly, stoner. Yeah. Anyway, I was saying, let us give you an example of using a more responsible philosophy. Let's say we want to drive cars on the roads. A better approach is one of total responsibility, self-responsibility, meaning if you hit someone, of course, you're responsible. If you're hit by someone else, you're responsible for that too. If they are in some type of automobile dispute, each person involved takes responsibility for his position, and there would never be any victims. In a case like this, what we call our civil law is not applicable. Civil law, in other words, the way our system is set up, ensures that someone is a victim, that someone must be held responsible because no one is willing to take responsibility for themselves. Our system reinforces the idea that someone is at fault, and therefore there must be someone to punish. Because we are unable or unwilling to take total responsibility for our own reality, thus victimhood is an automobile insurance commercial on television where an injured person says, "It wasn't my fault. Don't I deserve something for my pain and suffering?" This is the attitude, the dynamic that is constantly being perpetrated. And I recognize that we may not be able to change overnight. It may be too much of a shock. However, right now, the majority of people are unaware that they are even perpetuating the cycle of fear, non-responsibility, blame, and victimhood. Imagine what it would be like to drive daily, and 100% of the time, you know that you're creating your reality, and you know that, sorry, I get choked up sometimes, because I know we create our reality. Everything that happens to you is created by you. Is that a mind tripper or what? It's yes, everything that happens to you is created by you, even inadvertently, but for a very specific reason. If you get into an automobile accident, if you hit someone, you take responsibility for it. If you are hit from behind, for instance, you recognize that it is within your reality only because you have drawn it there. Imagine a society that holds these beliefs. It would have no victimhood. It would be a society totally willing to take responsibility for everything that happens to it. We are working towards this, but because we have not recognized the trap we have set up for ourselves, it is almost as if we are running on a treadmill, trying to get down the street. That'll never work. Once we recognize how deep the structure is that we have created, we will be able to actively start changing it. And anger is not taking responsibility. Some of us have already been doing this. However, some of the ways we are trying to change it to get out of the structure are really dragging us deeper into it. Let's say you have someone who studies the Constitution and realize there's a contradiction between what was set up and what is going on now. Let's say this person has a lot of victimhood energy. They become angry about the situation, and because they're not willing to look at their source of their anger, their own inner victimhood, their own relinquishment of their own sovereignty, they externalize the victimization and see the system itself as the perpetrator. You then have someone who's angry, and they just decide they're going to buck the system. I was there too. Let's say they refuse to register their car, they refuse to get automobile insurance or a driver's license. In their anger, their intent is to make a statement, to cause trouble. This creates resistance towards the very structure they're trying to pull away from. All it does is balance the intensity of the structure. It will not free them, but keep them chained to it. The person never looks at the real reason for their anger, the relinquishment of their personal sovereignty, but instead blames that loss on someone else. You can never be sovereign if you blame anyone for anything. And whenever you do, the structure is kept in place. So, there are many individuals who feel they are engaged in good causes when they are acting in anger. But I will tell you that anger will never solve the structural challenges of our society. It can never break the structure. The question is, what will break the structure? First, an intelligent understanding of the structure itself, why it was created and how it is kept in place. You know what? I have a quick question. This hair right here under my nose is really, really irritating. Should I just shave it all off? I mean, I need the beard, but should I shave off this under my... Yes, agree. Agree with thine adversary while you are on the way with him. Otherwise, he will take you to jail. Don't cut it. Okay. The question is, what will break the structure? First, an intelligent understanding of the structure itself, why it was created, and how it is kept in place. After that, it will be necessary to process any anger you might have, or martyrdom, or victimhood that you feel, and be willing to act from your own integrity, not from anger or an intent to make a statement, but because it's the only thing you can do in your integrity. There are people at present who are starting to hear the voice of their conscience, who are processing. Okay, I get it, guys. Thank you. Who are processing their victimhood, who are beginning to see the true nature of the structure and how it was put there. Man, amen for that too. And when they realize this in their own conscience, they can no longer keep it intact. They must follow their own integrity. And in that choice to follow integrity cleanly, clearly, with no anger, the structure begins to change. The issue is not the structure that is enslaving you, but the fact that you have allowed it to enslave you. If you can begin to understand why you've allowed this and why you've forgotten to put it here to begin with, the true sovereignty, man, it's just right around the corner. So, process your inner reality and then change the outer choice. And see, I wrote this book, man, you guys, a long time ago. You guys could have been reading it a long time ago, you know. But the entire insurance system, not just automobile insurance, but life insurance, health insurance, malpractice insurance, the entire spectrum is an automatic relinquishment of sovereignty. I would think that anyone daring to create their own reality would be unable to participate in the insurance scheme. And I would say also that if you 100% absolutely believe you create your reality and you know it, you cannot participate in the insurance idea. I'm bringing this up because it seems to be one of the easiest first steps to take. If someone is ready to regain their sovereignty and take back their power, it would seem to me that facing this insurance issue would be a good place to start. How do you do that? Well, you just stop paying your premiums. I must caution everyone, however, that if you're going to begin down this road, you must be very clear within. I would never suggest that someone stop paying their premiums because they still fear an accident. They will draw the accident to their doorway. They will not go through the process of healing by withdrawing the insurance. What I mean is you will not heal this issue by withdrawing your insurance first and then processing. You heal it by processing it to the point of integrity, which then leads you to withdraw your insurance. And I'm sure that we've all heard people in situations who had to maintain irresponsibility because they have insurance that would not pay if they were found responsible. This is exactly the way insurance is supposed to work. You are rewarded when you're not responsible. If someone is afraid, they haven't fully processed this thing about being responsible. If they maintain their insurance, that automatically keeps them in a state of irresponsibility. And it seems to me, you got to take that step first. You can't maintain irresponsibility and expect to be seen as responsible. And this goes for many areas. CPS uses this against families, against life partners, against married, against families to steal their kids. And who knows what they do. The goal is always paternal alienation and loss of the parental rights. You don't hear about these things where the people jump through all these hoops for years for CPS, and then they get the kids back for being good. You never hear about that. You always hear about termination of parental rights and stuff, alienation of and division of the parents who together would be the strongest thing in the world. And it would, I don't know. Anyway, it is important to recognize that our reality is changed by changing the external things in order to get the internal things. Our reality is changed by changing the internal things, which then affects the external things. If someone maintains their insurance because they're afraid they're going to get in an accident, well, I already read all this. Anyway, some people may find it easier to find those issues by taking the step and saying, the insurance isn't doing me any good, and it's keeping me from my sovereignty, and it's an extra bill every month I have to pay that I don't get anything out of because I'm responsible anyway. And stopping the insurance, allowing these issues to come up even more clearly. Some people may choose to do it that way. Just remember, if you remove the physical thing, which is the insurance, you will simply transfer your inner feelings to something else, and it won't solve or change anything. So the distinction then is that if someone is not on the path, the insurance should not be removed. If they get on the path, then that's another matter. This brings up another point about creating our own reality, the locking of one's house and car. Obviously, if we create our own reality, then we have to create being robbed. And I've done this. I did this to myself before. It is amazing that someone could give their power to one piece of metal on a door when locked makes them feel safe. What I'm suggesting is that you should process the fear of being robbed before you leave the door unlocked. Because if you process the fear first, one day there will be a welling of emotion, a feeling, and a shift, and the realization will become emotionally that they do not need the lock on the door anymore. I mean, you could have the lock on the door, but you don't have to use it. But it won't come in the same way if the attempt to change is the external before the internal. You see what I'm saying? Recognize that we as human beings are very adept at transferring issues, meaning that if they start leaving their doors open, they're going to manifest the fear of invasion by another area of their life. It will always be there in various forms until they process the internal dynamics. And I'm certainly not disagreeing with you or any decisions you have made in the past or future. Obviously, they have worked for you. As a whole, my recommendation is to deal with it internally before manifesting it in the external world. Dealing with victimhood. Try to take a day and notice every time you're not being 100% totally responsible for your reality. Try to notice whenever you fear being a victim. If you're completely honest with yourself, you're going to see it quite often that day. And a lot of it is a quite unconscious patterning that is in some ways dormant, meaning that it doesn't affect you negatively. There are many individuals who put a lot of energy into the idea of victimhood. Those individuals might have a very difficult time with some of the concepts we were talking about because it requires you to give up ever seeing yourself as a victim. That can be hard for some people. And that means recognize whenever you reward yourself for pain, suffering, or anything that is not of service to you in a positive, exciting way. Recognize what you're doing, such as letting the insurance companies pay your medical bills only because you were not to blame. You're rewarded by an outside entity if you're not to blame. That concept is totally incompatible with the ultimate concept of common law and the spiritual sovereignty. These structures are in place, and they're actually even thought of as law, but we're struggling against them to change them. But most can't even see what we're struggling against. Oh, that was the horn. The challenge is to begin in the darkness to make out the shape that we have created to enslave ourselves. I cannot express to you how powerful the changes will be when we all begin relinquishing these old structures. You will do this layer by layer. Sometimes you may think you're at the end, but there will be another 5 layers to go. It's a very deep process we have created to protect ourselves, always having believed that we need to be taken care of, protected, and told what to do. There's an old saying that may have become a premise in our lives. If you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. In other words, as long as someone is contributing to the structure, a system opposed to our sovereignty, they are part of the problem. And it seems pretty polarized, doesn't it? Ultimately, there are no problems, though. It's all growth or challenge, and everything is actually neutral. But this idea is actually too dualistic from my point of view. For example, let's say a friend is involved in a quiet court case about the refusal to give a privilege license from the government to run a business. They would like to say that it doesn't feel like they're acting that they're doing it in anger. Although 4 years ago, when they challenged the driver's license issue, there was anger and conspiracy and all this and that involved. This time, it's simply that they cannot agree to pay the government protection money like the mafia demands for not harassing you. Operating a business is an inherent right and not a privilege. Should someone who operates a business renew their license? Or should they first process the decision and the reasoning before they even take that step? My recommendation is to totally and absolutely feel comfortable processing before any steps are taken, because if it is done with uncertainty or fear, it will add to the strength of the structure instead of helping to dissolve it. That is the way I see it, but I am certainly open for disagreement. I think that there has to be a certain amount of processing that occurs anyway, because the structure has become so ingrained that we have to face the fact that when someone is ready to take back their personal power to regain their sovereignty, one of the possibilities is jail. My friend, he could serve time in jail on this business license issue because it's a crime they have committed. In some states, the driver's license issue could lead to jail. There's also jail for the insurance issue in some states. So people have to get to the point where they recognize the consequences of their actions on both sides. The consequences of having given up their sovereignty and the continuing and perpetrating of the state, and the consequences of taking their sovereignty back. Freedom isn't free. And I cannot say there isn't going to be a gray area between the black and white where the transformation will occur. The consequence for bowing down to the system is that you keep the structure intact. There are definitely consequences for pursuing the sovereignty idea, though, because you may be punished. However, what it all comes down to is acting from your own integrity in your own inner searching. When you find what your integrity is guiding you to do, your sovereignty lies in following that. As you are soul searching, one of the key ideas is educating yourself on the Constitution and as much law as you can. Educating yourself beyond the textbooks that are the structures provide for you. Think about that one. Because the textbooks are written within that structure. You must educate yourself from the source. This is where one of the big challenges is, because many of you have not even been able to tell the difference between textbooks written by the structures and the clean information from the source that leads you to sovereignty. And it's a process of discernment. So I don't want to sound harsh, but our social brainwashing is phenomenal. For instance, individuals who call themselves patriotic Americans have certain beliefs. Patriotic Americans pay their taxes. However, when you research it, you will find that the taxation system as it exists now is not only contrary to the Constitution, but is in some ways actually against the law, like the real law, like it's doing harm to people. As a matter of fact, the tax system is not even part of the Constitution. The states never ratified it. So why do you think early Americans had the Tea Party? Because of taxation without representation? If you do your research, you'll find that the taxation system is, as it is set up now, is illegal. As I mentioned in the previous paragraph, The 16th Amendment was never ratified. So the premise that patriotic Americans pay their taxes is a distortion of the original intent of the Constitution. The second premise is all good Americans go to war when they are called. Think about this. Can you ever be of service to yourself or to your country if you're doing something that you believe is wrong? Individuals who follow that premise may be in direct opposition to what they feel. A corollary to the second premise, I've been reading for a little bit now, all good Americans go to war to fight the enemy, declares that you can be a victim, that there is an enemy, and that there is someone out there you must defeat. This idea of good and bad, enemies and heroes, will not free you from the structure. Instead, it keeps you solidly enslaved. I'm not. Now, imagine day-to-day things. For instance, there are laws that make you wear a helmet when you're driving a motorcycle, which are protecting you, because it is assumed that you're not capable of protecting yourself or being responsible for yourself. So something is imposed upon you. There are handgun laws, which are an attempt to control, because there is the belief that perpetrators and victims, this belief is constantly fed. Keeping drugs illegal is another false attempt to protect innocent people. All of these systems we have set up to prevent us from understanding what sovereignty really is. Sovereignty is taking total 100% responsibility for yourself as an individual, for your community, for your planet as a whole. So far, I've been talking about present day issues. Maybe it would help if I discussed some of the history of sovereignty. For instance, the founders of this country, George Washington, Ben Frank, Thomas Jeff, were all Masons. A great distrust for Masons has grown among many of the patriot movements around the country and among the people who claim to be seeking their own sovereignty. They take issue with the Masons because of the latter's involvement with the Trilateral Commission's conspiracy and so forth. But there is a dichotomy that has developed. Perhaps, hey, bro! Hi, Black Flags, what's going on? Hey, man! Good to see you. So there's a dichotomy that has developed. Perhaps we should examine the intentions of the Masons, of the Founding Fathers, and what is pertinent to the Founding Fathers' understanding of our sovereignty and what they expected to accomplish with the Constitution. Our Founding Fathers were very, very clever. It's not visible to the eye, but the way the Constitution is written, if it collapses in upon itself, or if it is perverted in any way, it will eventually turn around and work for your sovereignty instead of against it. An example of this, recently in Arizona, the automobile insurance law was changed, and recent statistics show that only 50% of the people have insurance. To register your car, now you must actually produce proof of your policy rather than just state that you have it. If you cancel it and are stopped by the police for any reason, they are told to take your license plates. And that they steal, common law, private ones too. And this will occur over the next, 12 months as people's registrations come up for renewal. Of course, insurance rates in this state, in all states, have skyrocketed, of course, right? The only response I can see to this whole process is that by the end of the year, there are going to be so many people ticked off that they will demand their sovereignty, right? Thus, the perversions of this issue will result in an increase of sovereignty, not a decrease. Thank you, High Impact. Man, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to work on getting my channel shut off, I guess. You know what I mean? Because I'm just coming all out with it. But thank you for showing up, man. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the thumbs up, everybody. So, was the Founding Fathers' shrewdness totally conscious on their part? Let's say they didn't understand it to the point where they could explain it to you, right? It was a sensing, just a knowingness and a guidance. They believed very firmly in what they were doing. And it's necessary to understand that there's no bad guy in any of this. The Emancipation Proclamation, the abolition of slavery, has caused some of the shifting in a non-conscious way. We had a group of people who once had special laws written for them, and when they began to be integrated into society, the structure of the laws needed to change. Often the laws were written as an adaptation or to a circumstance that had a lot of pressure around it. This adaptation was never checked and balanced with the Constitution. It was a pressured in the moment expedient. Again, there's no bad guy here. It's just layer upon layer upon layer of distractions that have solidified the structure itself. We must recognize that our forefathers were struggling with some of the same issues that we are now, and they had not resolved the idea of property rights. It was basically the same as it is now. The strongest one, the one with the most toys, wins. Ownership is based on what you can seize in terms of history. Recognize that when people feel they have to take something from someone else. Wow, someone showed up out here. Yeah, that's cool. Ownership is based on what you can seize in terms of history. Recognize that when people feel they have to take something from someone else, they must in some way believe themselves to be lacking. Reminds me of, anyway. They must be in some way deficient in their sovereignty. When one is truly sovereign, coexisting with other sovereigns, there are no property disputes. There are no ownership problems. To describe this type of reality is very difficult because to some people, it sounds like communism, but that is not at all what I'm speaking of. The forefathers taught victim and aggressor roles. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you that our forefathers had wonderful and wise ways of dealing with these things because they didn't. We learned what we are experiencing now from them. We learned that from them that the strongest rule, that some are victims and others are aggressors. Even to this day, in the collective human soul, there is the belief that we don't own this planet. This belief is what has delayed us for so long in taking a global stand on environmentally and socially. We still don't believe we own the planet or that we exist and co-create with the planet on equal terms. We have no concept of our own sovereignty. In an attempt to figure out what sovereignty is, we just take from others. It seems to me that our misperception of our own sovereignty may be exactly what our leaders have wanted us to believe. There seems to be an assumption by those in power that we are inferior, like the Caucasian assumption about blacks. I would like to define the difference between rights and privileges real quick before we go. These words are not being used interchangeably. Privilege is something that is granted to you from another source, and a right is inherent by your existence innately. For instance, you have the right to celebrate God, but you're given the privilege of worshiping God when you go to church and pay your dues. If there is an assumption by government that we exist as a privilege, this contract, whether it be a contract between us as a citizen with the government or individual agreements with each contract, it is similar to the driver's license issue. It would be absolutely exercised from our side without conscious knowledge of the consequences. I have used the term implied consent because since we believe our existence is a privilege, then our interactions with the government are subject to the laws of that privilege and the masses' belief system. And some of those laws we may not even be aware of. It is like having a driver's license and the commonly held belief that driving is a privilege granted by a higher authority. This higher authority grants us the privilege of using the roads, using an automobile, etc. By accepting that privilege, though, we have implied our consent. Therefore, we must agree to have insurance, registration, and not let someone else use our car who does not have those things. All of this happens because we have accepted the privilege rather than exercised our inherent right. All this confusion and restriction when we already have the right to travel automatically guaranteed through the Constitution. And so it is like the government has read our unconscious minds and they know we think our existence is a privilege. Therefore, when we ask, why are you doing this? They say, we have the right. And yes, this is true because we have implied our consent by playing out the role of a helpless species. That's one way of looking at it. If you were sovereign, no one could have rights over you, but since you're not active sovereigns, someone assumes to have rights over you. There's always hierarchy in a non-sovereign atmosphere, but in a sovereign atmosphere, there's never a hierarchy. As a species, we have the right to interact with each other and to live as free men and women and to know our heritage. We have a right to explore all levels of consciousness and reality. We do. Sadly, though, we have set up privileges to protect ourselves from some of the scary things because deep down, we don't know if we really are sovereign or not. Sad. And as we built this elaborate structure based on privileges and not rights, we start distorting our own version of the entire universe. Those rights just mentioned are always active, but if you're not sovereign, you can't interface with them. Therefore, you will act out your right to interact with others through the privilege structure that has been set up, which is equal to belief systems. To put this another way, you will always act out your right to travel, but because we are not yet sovereign, we must act out that right according to the structure of the privileges. Therefore, we act out our right to travel through the privilege of a license, insurance, and registration. This is a very significant point I am making here. Your rights will always be there, but you can't see them. You can't know your rights unless you're sovereign. Therefore, you must act according to the non-sovereign privileges, which seem as if they are given to you by someone else. Therefore, because we believe we are not sovereign and can be victimized, we will act on our own rights through that belief system and the structure that allows us to be victims. You're allowed to be a victim, and you choose to. And they wouldn't have it any other way. We are all, in fact, always in touch with our rights. We have just cloaked them. We've twisted them. We've distorted them into privileges. We've come to believe that privileges are rights when they are really two different things. The only framework within which we could interact has been one of inequality, hierarchy, manipulation, control, or fear, because those are the very structures upon which our society are built. Obviously, one of the things that keeps us from claiming our sovereignty is our religious structure. The concept that God is sovereign and that we are his subjects. That is what they wanted us to believe. But a true sovereign will never have subjects. If the religious structure broke apart, every other structure would collapse. No other structure could support itself after that. Throughout history, we have called people subjects. We've called a baron or a king a sovereign, and they have had subjects. However, to some degree, we are also interlinked. In only one sense, I'm saying that we could never truly be sovereign unless someone else in our reality bubble also were. Then we can have an example. That doesn't mean everybody in the entire world, but everyone with whom you interact. This is one way of looking at it. The sovereign king can never be sovereign in the sense that he can't be sovereign if he's dealing with inequality. To clarify, let's say I'm truly sovereign and my friend is not. What if I see him as a complete sovereign even though he's playing the role of a subject? We would see him as a complete sovereign because it's all the sovereignty you can allow yourself to see. Recognize that there is not a point of 100% sovereignty. Just like you can't limit yourself to the amount of love you can feel today, there is no end to sovereignty. So your ability to see sovereignty reflected in the is limited by how much you can see in yourself. It's ever expanding. Thus, you may look at your friend and see he's a total sovereign. He may not feel sovereign. You are simply minor reflections for each other. As the entire planet plays out the sovereignty issue, you will help each other. You're all intricately intertwined. Though you would like to think you're not dependent on the other person for your attainment of sovereignty. But at the same time, their reflection of sovereignty. Oop, there I go honking the horn again. Sorry. But But at the same time, their reflection of sovereignty to you is crucial. Obviously, this transformation is very much a part of claiming your sovereignty. Here's some techniques. It's such a widespread issue right now. Through religion and politics and economics and relationships. So where do we start? What can we do in particular to start on this road to being truly sovereign? Well, each person will be different, but you can start by identifying the areas in your life which are so blatantly non-sovereign. Look at those first. Understand why that is so. I'll give you some hints. First, look at your religious structure and your education system. Then look at your legal system. These suggestions themselves are likely to open a whole can of worms. Each person, though, will go through the process of attaining sovereignty in his or her own way. I would suggest that you spend lots of time learning as much as possible. Examine all of your beliefs with a critical eye and to try and obtain and study and research material you can. There are schools that teach these principles. Oh, sorry. There are... I think I lost my place. There are schools that teach these principles, but I'm not referring to metaphysical schools. I'm referring to schools that teach common law. And that's a start for some people. There's no structure to follow to become sovereign because it's not anything you've ever experienced. We are creating this structure as we go, and we are all part of it, and it's a very exciting time right now. Such an exciting and a wonderful time to simply just be alive. And it's even more exciting to know that we can create a new system based on what we have learned from the old one. So right now, I know mine is. Your head may be spinning with all the possibilities that the sovereignty thing has to offer. And perhaps you might be starting to like the idea of becoming sovereign and want to begin taking steps. But you have found blocks to changing things in your life, and you know that you're not truly sovereign. And it seems so different and foreign. And maybe the idea of assuming full responsibility for your actions has you scared. But I'm here to promise you that the possibilities that I can see as soon as we change this oppressive system, happiness, freedom, and peace will come to all of those who are currently suffering. At various times, we may need to find ourselves in a position of using certain rationales to renew a driver's license. And one might also think that it's very difficult to become sovereign without your own piece of land. But here's a case where if you force this on a physical level, you would not accomplish anything because the internal ideas must first be processed. And that was my frustration. I found myself wanting to take too large of a step, which may have been self-sabotage on my part because to some degree, the self-sabotage would be the reinforcement of my identity as a failure. But if you are willing to take specific steps to achieve sovereignty, just do what you can. You've likely already accomplished some very valuable things internally. And this will make external manifestation natural. Eventually. You need to be concerned about your external reality, though, because ultimately, to be sovereign, you must take physical action. When you do begin to initiate actions that display your sovereignty externally, remember there is never a need to force it. Force implies resistance. Resistance is what makes force necessary. I would always simply suggest that you do what you can. What we are attempting to do with this sovereignty idea is to stop keeping that dynamic of polarity in place. Therefore, when you go inside to process and then take the steps from your realizations, you're not using force. Force is not needed. Thus, there is no resistance. It is much more thorough, much more transformational. Do what you can, keep processing. There are small steps being taken. Recognize that the shift in your own belief system is extremely powerful, not only for you, but for everyone, for mass consciousness in general. Let's give you an example. Let's say you went to war. Which has more impact? 100,000 men burning their draft cards out of protest, or 100,000 men shifting their consciousness? It is tempting to say that burning draft cards has more impact, but that is not the case. Those people who burn their draft cards may be burning them out of anger or fear, but not necessarily out of a change of consciousness. If 100,000 men burn their draft cards and don't go to war, you might be thinking that might not be as effective as a change in consciousness, even though 50,000 of those men may actually continue to participate in the war. And that's not something that would be possible with a change in consciousness. I used to think that the physical demonstration of burning the draft card, for example, was the most important step that could be taken. But really, the change in consciousness of the draftees is much more important than the physical action of burning the draft card. The change in consciousness is much more impacting than you can possibly imagine. Let's say there are 100,000 people burning those draft cards. Maybe some men are burning them because they're mad at their fathers consciously or subconsciously. They don't care if they go to war. They're just mad at their fathers. And this is a way to vent that anger. If they're doing it out of anger, they may have no idea why they're angry. If they delve into it, that's when they start changing their consciousness. Someone who gets a driver's license after being educated about rights, privileges, and sovereignty has taken an immense step, because now he's not doing it out of denial or ignorance. Instead, he's doing it with a shift of consciousness, doing it consciously. So let's say that 100,000 men burn their draft cards because of a change in consciousness. But in this little story, let's say they were forced to go to war anyway. Having those 100,000 men with that change in consciousness in the army will have a tremendous impact on the mass consciousness of the army itself. I saw that in the Iraqi conflict and Afghanistan and all these more recent things that have been going on, that they may have manifested in as very few deaths on one side. Even though there were lots of Iraqi deaths, there could have been 10 times that number. There was most certainly a shift in consciousness in terms of the troops that went to Iraq. Many went not because they believed in the conflict, but because they felt in some way that their energy, their consciousness would be useful. Therefore, to judge a man for going to war when you do not know his motivations actually helps to maintain the structure of dysfunction rather than to disintegrate it. If the consciousness shifts in these 100,000 men before they go off to war, they're not going to burn their draft cards out of anger. Instead, they're going to realize precisely what step binds them to the military. It is not the draft nor the induction, but the taking of the oath, which is always done voluntarily. The insidious thing is that the government and the military do not ever point that out. They tell you that it's the induction that turns a civilian into a military person. To clarify what I mean, as there may be some confusion, and this is a very important point, you are led to believe, just like with the driver's and marriage licenses, that when you get the draft card and you are inducted, you must serve. However, you're never committed to serve until you raise your hand and take the oath. And the taking of the oath is voluntary, because being forced to take an oath makes the oath itself invalid. And so, there have been men who have not taken the oath and thus were dismissed from the induction and didn't have to serve. Yes, it caused quite a bit of a commotion. Yeah, think about Custer's allocution. Look that up. Google that. But they were ultimately dismissed. The oath that you take to get into the military is a voluntary oath, and we have not known that. The marriage license is also voluntary. It's also a voluntary procedure, as is the driver's license. Paying taxes is a voluntary procedure, as is the... Wait, I feel like I'm going in circles here. Anyway, but you have led yourselves to believe that they're not. And that in itself is what is insidious. So now that we know emotional sovereignty means understanding your reasons and motivations and healing those denied parts of you, which will eventually lead you to take 100% responsibility for your reality. And the result of that, my friends, is spiritual sovereignty. You are on the path. You will create it. Have patience and trust yourselves. This is a book, and that was only just a small part of it. So, thank you so much, you guys. I'm done. I gotta go. Have a great day. Peace.